And I don't think it's because it has nothing to say. I think sometimes we just don't get this story to read and then to reflect upon. So as I was reading this story, I thought, well, this is an interesting way to begin a season of waiting. So in Babylon, we read last week from Jeremiah, and Jeremiah says to the people, you're going to be in exile for a while. Invest where you are. You remember, he says to build your home, to marry and have children, and to invest in the place where you are. And so the people of Israel have been doing that. And they found that in many ways they have been successful investing in the place where they are. But as you can imagine, it can sometimes be difficult to hold on to commitments, especially those of faith and life, that go directly contrary to the culture that surrounds us. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are faithful Jews. They've done good work, and I think the problem that the people who kind of tattle on them have is that they do really good work, and these other people would like to be lazier than they are. And so they look around and they think, these guys are just ruining it for the rest of us. And so they find a reason to tell King Nebuchadnezzar, hey, you know what? These guys are causing trouble. And so they go and they sort of tattle on them. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who are committed to walking in God's way, come before the king. And did you catch this? They say to King Nebuchadnezzar is angry. And he says, really? You're not going to bow before the statue like I have commanded everyone to bow? You're not going to do that? What God will save you? And these three guys stand before the most powerful man that lives where they are in Babylon, and they say, you know, our God, whether God decides to save us from the fiery furnace or not, is worth following, regardless of what you threaten to do to us. As we talk about preparing for the way of the Lord, I wonder what kind of commitment we prepare to make. We are invited to make the similar commitment to say, no matter what, we are prepared to follow God wherever God takes us. And we trust that whatever God does for us is the right thing. Many of you know I spent some time in South Africa last year. And so as I was thinking about today is also World AIDS Day. And so I'm making an assumption that for those of you who have been here for a number of years, that Judy Gantz, your former pastor, shared a bit with you about what she knows about HIV and AIDS throughout the world, and the work that's been done and is being done to curb that pandemic and to support people who suffer from the virus and from AIDS. So AIDS is a terrible thing, and it's been going on for a long time. And you may remember that when we first realized that AIDS was happening, it was very stigmatized. So people didn't want to tell you about HIV and AIDS. They certainly didn't want to tell you that they had contracted it. They didn't want to talk about how. It's a very difficult subject. And I think churches maybe had a more difficult time than some in talking about the realities of this, because it brings up a whole host of questions that we do not generally talk about. Now, whether or not we should talk about them is a totally different subject, but just to kind of give you guys some context. So I was in South Africa at a Presbyterian church, and we were talking to different leaders in the country about what their leadership had been like in South Africa. And so we talked to people who had worked during apartheid in resistance. We talked to people who had served congregations. And this particular congregation had done a tremendous amount of work in their township, kind of the neighborhood around them. That wasn't the lowest of the low, wasn't the worst township, but it certainly wasn't the best, the conditions of the people that live there. And this pastor said, when we realized that AIDS and HIV was something we needed to know more about, our church decided that every Sunday, 15 minutes before the worship service, we would have a time of education about HIV and AIDS. I will tell you, as a North American pastor, my heart started to pitter-patter because I don't think I would have been courageous enough to make such a simple step to help people understand about something that at that time was so stigmatized and so beyond anybody's range of thought that I would have accepted that we were going to talk about it every Sunday for 15 minutes before worship. So he tells this story and he says, we committed to doing this, and he goes, and it wasn't long before we realized that we had opened a can of worms. That we thought we were going to talk only about this virus and what happens to it. But he said, but we decided and ended up talking about all kinds of things like sexuality and promiscuity and all these things that, let's just be honest, most of us in church don't prepare to talk about. So, in my mind, I thought, well, surely they just decided to stop doing it, right? Like, well, it's just getting too hairy here. And this pastor, he said, it was really hard. And there were lots of things we were not prepared for. But we had committed to educating ourselves and the people that we serve so that we might keep people safe. And so they kept educating people for 15 minutes before worship every Sunday. And now they have an orphan program. They have women in the church who go to the houses where the orphans are fostered, and they give them support. They have all kinds of education now in their community, and they have seen that it has helped to save lives of people where they live. And as I was thinking about these three men who faced the fiery furnace, I wondered about the commitment we have to know and trust that God is with us so that we will go through whatever challenges come our way. And as I thought about that congregation in South Africa, I wondered how much like a fiery furnace that process felt to them. Because as they entered into the decision and the commitment to follow God by offering people information that would help to keep them safe, that would give them life, they didn't know to prepare for all that would happen next. And yet they didn't turn away and decide that now it was too hard, that the challenge was too great. They knew and trusted that God would go with them, no matter how hard it got or how hot the flames felt, to get to the other side. We prepare for the coming of a king, one whose kingdom changes everything, one whose kingdom brings life and brings it abundantly. I wonder, though, if we are aware that our commitment to follow this king will take us places we are not prepared to go. It may take us places that we would never have considered before. And yet here we are, gathered together, singing of this coming King whose life among us changes everything and invites us to walk into a new world and to build a new kingdom. In the month ahead, as we prepare for this Christ child, may our hearts be open and prepared for all that may come. That together we can walk through whatever struggles or challenges or hopes or fears that present themselves, knowing that God has never left us and that God has a plan for where we will go and who we will care for. Amen.